and custom to welcome you all to our beautiful country. We are the first people of the rivers and the mountains. Our moieties are Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle, and Wa, the crow. Our culture today is very much alive and strong, as is our language, song and dance. I am here to welcome you all to our country, Tangwarong country. To do that, I ask just three things. Please respect our land, our people, and our culture. I welcome you all and ask that our ancestors give you all safe passage. We now share with you our country, from the tips of the trees to the depths of their roots. Womanjika Tangwarong Bik, welcome to Tangwarong country. Ngang Godjin, thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And if, as guests arrive, they can come in if you like, and plenty of seats. Welcome. You've done well to come out on a wintry Macedon Ranges night. We haven't technically started winter yet. That starts tomorrow, but I think it feels like we have. Thank you to Auntie Joanne. Our elders are very busy this week, of course, through Reconciliation Week. I acknowledge the Dja Dja Wurrung, the Tanarung and the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of our land and our waterways. I recognise their living cultures and ongoing connection to country and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the local Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander residents of Macedon Ranges who may be here tonight. And as you would know, we're speaking and meeting on Tanarung land. So my name's Bernie O'Sullivan, the CEO of the Macedon Ranges Shire. Lovely to have you here tonight in the Kyneton Town Hall in Reconciliation Week, which is one of our really special weeks of the year. And we're here to explore the importance of truth-telling as one of the very important pathways to reconciliation. It was really nice to hear Auntie Joanne talk about sharing country, and that quote that she mentioned about, from the tips of the tree to the depths of the roots, and it's something that you can really invokes that full sense of sharing. Hopefully you've had a chance to grab yourself a coffee, tea, sample the cakes and biscuits prepared by the Murnong Mummers, a local First Nations owned and operated catering group. Now we have two amazing guest speakers with us here tonight that will help address the relationship between truth-telling and reconciliation. Now, just to do a little bit of housekeeping, also in terms of our guests that we have here that are present, and some apologies too. So I'll introduce Nicole Finlay from Reconciliation Victoria and Brent Ryan from the Yurok Justice Commission shortly. In addition, tonight we've got councillors Jeanette Pearce and Annette Deeth, Mark Ridgway and Bill West. We also, I'll mention our Deputy Mayor in a minute. We have apologies. We've had to, our Deputy Mayor has kindly stepped in at short notice with our Mayor Jennifer Anderson is ill at the moment, and also Councillor Anne Moore is an apology. And also welcome our new Manager of Community Strengthening, Amy Holmes. Do you want to put your hand up there, Amy? Day two, so Amy knows a lot and learning a lot day 2, but great to have you join our organisation, Amy. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Council's Deputy Mayor, Rob Guthrie, to open tonight's event. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Bernie. This is why we have a Deputy Mayor, because life overtakes us sometimes, and unfortunately Jennifer's fallen sick, and so she's a doctor, so she self-diagnosed herself and is going to take a week off. So yes, as Bernie said, my name's Rob Guthrie, I'm the Deputy Mayor, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the Dja Dja Wurrung, Taungurung, Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of this land and waterway. I recognise their living cultures and ongoing connection to country and pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders residents of Maston Ranges who may be here tonight. Tonight, as you all know, we're meeting and speaking on Taungurung land. Bernie has acknowledged the other councillors who is here. On my notes it says that I would like to acknowledge Councillors Janet Pearce, Councillor Mark Ridgway, Councillor Bill West. I haven't seen Councillor Annette Death yet, so maybe she's a last-minute apology. And as Bernie said, we have apologies from Mayor Anderson and Councillor Pearce. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our 2 guest speakers, Brent Ryan, Assistant Director Education at Yoorrook Justice Commission, and Nicole Finlay, CEO of Reconciliation Victoria, as well as Dennis Batty, local Tauranga man and member of Council's Reconciliation Action Plan Implementation Working Group, who is in our audience this evening. Thank you for coming to our Reconciliation Week event this evening on truth-telling and reconciliation. Reconciliation is an important issue for all of us, and consistent with the theme for National Reconciliation Week, we all need to be brave and make change. As I reflect on Council's Reconciliation Action Plan journey so far, the work undertaken to prepare our Reconciliation Action Plan, Council unanimously endorsing it in September last year, then 3 very special launches of the Reconciliation Action Plan on 3 traditional owner countries in March, and the event at Gisborne was spectacular. We had Bunjil flying overhead just after the smoking ceremony, so that really made everybody's day. So I stand here during Reconciliation Week feeling proud and excited with the knowledge that our work towards reconciliation has begun in earnest. As stated in our Reconciliation Action Plan, Council's vision for reconciliation is one of equality and unity between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all Maston Ranges communities, which recognises past injustice, our shared history and our shared future, and strengthens Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' rights to self-determination. Maston Ranges Shire Council will contribute to a future where Dja Dja Wurrung, Taungurung and Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples' histories, cultures and rights are respected, learned from and celebrated, and where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have access to equitable opportunities that enhance self-determination. This evening from Brent Ryan we'll learn about what the Yoorrook Justice Commission is doing to help us understand those past injustices and what healing might be needed to put things right. Yoorrook means truth in the Wamba language of northwestern region of Victoria. The Commission will lead the first formal truth-telling process into historical and ongoing injustices experienced by First Peoples in Victoria. Nicole Finlay will talk to of the work Reconciliation Victoria is undertaking in supporting local government and community to get a shared understanding of meaningful reconciliation so as to achieve better outcomes of First Nations peoples. Maston Ranges Shire Council wants to work in partnership with our local community to progress reconciliation and strives for these better outcomes. that is why we're holding our community round table event next week on Tuesday at the Woodend Community Centre. If you haven't already done so, please register for this event on our website and join hopefully Mayor Anderson and me in having a conversation about what we can do as a community to make a positive difference for our First Nations peoples. Be brave, make change. And again, I apologise for reading this to you, but I only got the assignment late this afternoon. I really didn't have much time to practice rehearsing it. So thank you very much.
Well done. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Guthrie, for those opening words. Now, our first speaker tonight is Brent Ryan. Brent is of Muti Muti and Irish descent. For 5 years, Brent taught at Parkville College inside the Melbourne Youth Justice Centre while studying a Master of Teaching in secondary through the Teach for Australia Leadership and Development program. He then worked at the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency and held positions of team leader of learning and development, where he led a team that focused on enhancing the skills and practice of 700 plus staff and providing professional development to the community service sector, including the department who engaged with Aboriginal children and families. He then led the agency's work in education as the inaugural Senior Education Advisor. And then in 2021, Brent joined the Yurruk Justice Commission as Assistant Director Education, where he will assist informing and involving the public throughout Yurruk's work and education system changes in the final report. Clearly very qualified to talk to us tonight. Welcome, Brent.
We've got a laptop down here, so just bear with me 1 second, thanks. Just need to put the order in at Yurruk for some jumpers. I think it is very chilly up here, so that's okay for the moment, but the polo will do, I think. But thanks everyone for being here. Again, I just want to thank the Taungurung people for their warm welcome. Can everyone hear me okay as well? Beautiful. And acknowledge their people and this country that they've cared for so well for so long. I want to also extend that to any other First Nations people here in the room. But also I think with Reconciliation Week, just to acknowledge you all here today. Genuinely we see you and we thank you for being here. As said by MC, it is a cold, almost winter night, so you being here is genuine and part of the work that we're doing and Reconciliation Week, you know, activities like this are going to stimulate conversation and positive change, so thank you for that. It's great to be back in person again. I think it's been, you know, a couple of years, and I was just saying to Nicole before, it is nice just to see people, have a coffee and kind of get out and about again. So thanks for having us here and organising tonight. The aim of, I suppose, our presentation tonight or conversation with some questions at the end is to tell you a bit more about the Yurruk Justice Commission, what we're doing, what we've been doing and kind of where we're going. And a bit of background, but as I said, I also want to ensure there's time for some questions at the end, and then we can also sit down and have a chat, and I'll hang around at the end as well, just to have any questions and pass on my email and that kind of stuff as well. But just quickly, this thing's got to be turned on, Brent. I will just talk about myself really quickly to give a bit of context. I don't know if that buzzer thing works still. So my name is Brent Ryan, Assistant Director Education at Yurruk. As mentioned, father's side is Irish, from a place called Limerick over in Ireland. I haven't been there yet because of COVID, but that's definitely an aspiration of mine. And my mum's nan was an Aboriginal woman born in Balreynolds. So for those who aren't aware, it's 100 k's north of Swan Hill, southern New South Wales, and I've had the privilege to get back there a few times, connect with the Land Council, the Murrumbidgee and some of my community members who I probably didn't have the opportunity to meet growing up, living down in Melbourne. So yeah, Mum was the youngest of 6. Her father raised her in a commission house in Preston, and they both passed away kind of when she was 9 and 11, so she probably didn't get the opportunities that I've got today to kind of learn and connect more about my culture. Probably in the early 70s, it was, despite a lot of strong self-determination acts and ACCOs kind of starting, racism was still kind of highly prevalent. And yeah, she probably didn't have those strong cultural mentors to guide her. So for me to kind of jump into this space, half of it was probably just to help her and kind of support Mum on that journey with the resources I had at hand personally, and professionally it's been so kind of rewarding to keep learning about myself, but also this important space that we're talking about tonight. So a little bit about my kind of work journey. I taught it 2 years down at Parkville College in the old Tirana, for those who might know what that was called, in education, and then actually 3 years up here in Malmesbury. So the drive tonight was pretty familiar, albeit long from Melbourne, but a rewarding one, and something that I hold really dear, teaching a lot of our kids who have had probably different upbringings. They've got incredible strengths and resilience, but suffered some trauma themselves. And as we probably know in the room, a quarter of our kind of young people locked up are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So it's a significant overrepresentation that something like Yuruk will look to address as well. VACA, an amazing opportunity and place to work at, the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency, and probably a bit more preventative. I think in youth justice that recidivism rate is really high and can be quite frustrating. So to work with families and young people to keep them connected is really rewarding. But the opportunity to work at Yuruk, like I'll speak about in a minute, was a bit of a no-brainer. And we were chatting just this afternoon over a coffee. Like, the Aboriginal space in Victoria is genuinely exciting right now. Like, we are the most progressive state in Australia, comfortably. I know, and congratulations to the Shire for their RAP launch recently and some of these community yarns that are coming up. If you do have any other time to do some reading, you can kind of, what I just mentioned there about Victoria being so progressive is the Family Matters report they release yearly, and you just kind of see states and territories and what they're doing in the space. And Victoria, it's bloody exciting. So thanks again for having me, and looking forward to talk about Yuruk. As mentioned in the intro, Yuruk is a Wamba word that means truth. These truths are about to be opened up, shared and heard in the Victorian public. This is the first formal truth-telling process into historical and ongoing injustices experienced by First Peoples in Victoria, and the first truth-telling in Australia. Truth-tellings have helped societies heal from certain colonisations and traumas. So for those who are unaware of truth-tellings, there has been 35 or 40 in the world. Some notable ones include the South African one post-apartheid, and in Canada in 2014-15, the most recent with their Indigenous schools. The truth-telling, as we've already found out, and as we will, there's going to be some significant, I suppose, really strong traumatic stories that we're going to hear that's going to help kind of set that record. But we also, and we mentioned it before, there's going to be some significant resilience and strength that we're going to hear of Aboriginal people, and it's important that that's shared as well. It's not just the negative lens that probably traditionally people share or hear. It's also the strengths, the positives, and that ongoing connection to country, like in the intro we heard. The formation, I'll go into a little bit more, but the formation of Yuruk started in 2020 when the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, has anyone heard of the First Peoples Assembly? A few nods. They're kind of leading the treaty negotiations with the Victorian state government, called for a truth-telling commission, and then in May 2021, Yuruk was launched. I've got a photo I'll show in a minute of that. The two kind of, I suppose, bookends for us, amongst all our work, which we'll touch on, is an interim report, which is, I think, 3 days away from being sent to the printers for a June 30 kind of launch to the government and to the First Peoples, and then June 2024 a final report with the recommendations and the findings of the 3-year journey. So really exciting. It is difficult as a startup kind of organisation that you have to get everything together for that 3-year period, but we're really excited that we're building something special, and it's been called for. A Truth-Telling Commission's been called for a long time in Australia, and we're really grateful that Victoria is the first country or first state to have that. I'll touch on our commissioners. I might get a raise of hands if anyone has seen or heard or met any of the commissioners on screen. Has anyone seen any of the commissioners? That's good. So I will give you a little bit of a bio then of them. A couple of hands up. So we've got Chair Burke, Chair Auntie Eleanor Burke, Wagaya Wamba Wamba Elder, and she'll lead the chair. She's the chair of the commission, bringing decades of outstanding leadership, tireless dedication in advancing Aboriginal education and cultural heritage. We've got Deputy Chair Commissioner Sue-Ann Hunter, who's a Wurundjeri Wurrung woman, has specialised in the last 20 years of trauma and therapeutic work. So you will hear a lot of our commissioners have a different skill set, which is going to be really important for the work that we're doing. Our senior elder, or Dumbulgunya, is Uncle Wayne Atkinson, a Yorta Yorta Dja Dja Wurrung elder. Traditional owner, accomplished academic, and really strong kind of Koori oral history programs. Distinguished Professor Maggie Walter, who's a Palawa woman from Tasmania, and her specialty is kind of the data sovereignty piece, which is going to be really important in keeping stories that we hear and truths that we hear away from government and kind of. We'll talk about data sovereignty in a minute, how the individuals want that story shared. And our last member is our only non-Aboriginal commissioner, Kevin Bell, who was the Supreme Court judge for 20 years, so has a strong law background. The letters pattern, or the mandate, I suppose, is the Bible for what the Commission are doing. So there is kind of significant flexibility, which is important in this Royal Commission. Mental health, aged care, different ones like that, they're a bit more strict and kind of tighter, I suppose, descriptions of what you can look into. Our letters pattern, for those who haven't read it, is about 7 pages long and really broad, and I suppose it kind of needs to be, because you can't just say one thing has affected Aboriginal people. It's so intertwined and interconnected, unfortunately. So the letters pattern it guides the work we're doing. It was designed from the Assembly with community input and the state government. So it acknowledges Victoria's responsibilities. It's a really strong kind of human rights flavour as well, which is important for the work we're doing. And we've been asked to make recommendations about redress for historical injustices, as well as how to address ongoing issues through law and policy reform, including education and changes to the Victorian curriculum. We have flexibility, as I mentioned, to run the inquiry as we think is appropriate, which is really important. So that might look like song, dance, and different kind of things when we're out on country hearing from community. It's not just you have to do a 5,000 word report or a video. It's really important to give our people flexibility. And we will also ask government and kind of mainstream organisations to the stand in our hearing room. So there's that accountability as well, which is exciting and probably really needed. I had a really strong show of hands about the First Peoples Assembly, so linking to treaty and that kind of intersection. We're really cognizant that a lot of community and a lot of people probably are still grappling with what's the Assembly, what's treaty, what's Yuruk, and to be honest, a couple of years ago I was probably the same when I heard Yuruk was launched. The First Peoples Assembly are currently negotiating with the government at the moment around what a treaty might look like. So they've got the co-chairs, and I'll show you a photo of them in a minute. And they're kind of working at the moment in Victoria-wide around what a framework might look like for individual communities. So what it might look like for Dja Dja Wurrung, Wurundjeri, Taungurung, and individual communities, which is really important. So there might be some consistencies at a state level, but then also it gives self-determination to those individual communities. So we're not First Peoples, we're not treaty, but what we do after our 3 years will feed into the treaty negotiations, which just gives us more gravitas. Unfortunately, there's been, I suppose, royal commissions before where a report's probably been just been sat on the shelf, and as we know, with deaths in custody and bringing them home, 15% of recommendations have been implemented, which is really poor, and a lot of them are showing them face now with deaths in custody still super prevalent. So we're really, I think, excited and buoyed by the fact that what we do not just have recommendations to government and other organisations, but also feed into the treaty negotiations, which is, as I said before, Victoria is the only state currently entering treaty negotiations. So again, it's a progressive, exciting time to be involved, and we also just had bipartisan support from Liberal state government as well. So again, really exciting. As I said, they will occur in parallel, despite being separate processes. I'm going to skip that slide. This is a photo of the announcement of the Yurrook Justice Commission, its commissioners, and when the terms of reference were announced. So we've got James Merlino, Minister Gabrielle Williams, Co-Chair Arnie Geraldine Atkinson, and Marcus Stewart, so the co-chairs of the Assembly, and then our 5 commissioners behind them, and that was in May 2021. So just to try and paint a bit of a picture of separating the Assembly and the Yurrook Justice Commission. So what will Yurrook do? So we're probably, it was definitely a frustrating kind of first, I was just saying to Nicole before, frustrating kind of first 6-7 months with COVID, as we've all experienced. In general, you want to get out and meet the communities that you're working for and listening to, but with COVID, we couldn't do that. So there was a lot of online engagement, and we've started to kind of, and I'll talk about in a minute, get out and meet our community and hear from our elders. But I suppose our vision is a transformed Victoria based on truth and justice, grounded in First Peoples' enduring spirit, cultures and self-determination. We have 3 goals, so we've, I suppose, looked at the letters pattern, the 7 pages, and transformed that into 3 tangible goals. Firstly, truth, to create a lasting public record about what has happened in the past and still happening, and who and what is responsible. So that links to kind of hearing voices at the moment, having a record in First Peoples' voices, because often, as we know, it's painted in a mainstream white voice, and then who or what is responsible. So hearing that as well. Finally, some accountability. The second piece is understanding, and a lot of where my kind of role will come into play. So Yurrook has been asked to develop a shared understanding amongst all Victorians of the diversity, strength and resilience of First Peoples cultures. Pretty big job. Victoria, big place. Strong kind of First Nations community, strong ally group, and then there's obviously a lot of other people who probably are wanting to know more, but probably waiting for something to kind of jump in front of them. So, we speak about Reconciliation Week and people, being creative and getting out there and taking some initiative, but also it's on Yurrook to kind of throw that pebble in the water and start to get people listening and bringing the persuadables along, I suppose, to put a bit more heat at the back end on government to invest in some of these changes that we're suggesting. And lastly, that transformation piece, the recommendations, proposed laws, institutions, systems, and as I said, so that'll be one part of it, and also feeding into the treaty negotiations. So there's our vision and our 3 kind of clear goals, and I'll touch on probably the first one in a minute and what we've been doing in that space. It is important to also know that it's not just kind of what's happened at colonisation and from previous to now, it's up until today. So it just means that we can hear from family members of those who may have passed. It means we can hear from young kind of mob who have experienced racism in different settings still today. And as we know, those who work in the space or have community member allies and friends that racism and this kind of structural abuse still occurs. So I think that's really important to kind of mention that it's about today and also the previous 230 odd years of colonisation. So mentioning, apart from breaking down that letters pattern, we've also, I suppose, taken a few strong steps to build that cultural legitimacy. We put out some strategic priorities that we thought might be a good way to start, and kind of we had really strong feedback from community that they wanted us to start with elders. So there was a really strong kind of buy-in that we had to listen to our community elders, and that's what we've been doing in the recent part of our work. So I'll go to what's happened so far in 2022. Our community engagement, so we actually started to get out to Victoria and hear from traditional owners and a few ACCOs, but also our elders, as we said, so traditional owners around Victoria, and build that connection. Who are we? What are we doing? We know people have told their stories so many times and it can be quite taxing. Who are you again? What are you doing? Are you government? Are you separate? Are you treaty? What are you? Who are you doing? So that was really important for us to distinguish who we are and what we're doing. And that led to Elders Yarning Circles. So I was just telling Nicole, we probably travelled for 6 weeks. The commission has split up. We had our community engagement team listening to Victorian elders around what they thought was important in Yuruk and what are some of the key themes that they wanted us to unpack. An amazing kind of experience to get out again in community and just sit with elders by rivers, have a cuppa and listen, and for them to ask questions, be really vulnerable. If you've seen our socials, some really kind of powerful images that we'll keep sharing at the moment, but for them to really drive, and then we've gone into elders' truth-telling has begun. So as of a couple of weeks ago, our elders have begun to tell their truth. So again, if you've seen our socials or you've read a little bit about what Yuruk's doing at the moment, we had 7 or 8 strong Victorian community elders tell their truths. Some, as I said before, really kind of traumatic about being taken, no recognition after getting back from wars and these kind of things, passing down trauma through their bloodlines, but also the incredible resilience that they're here today to tell their stories, have their kids come and support them, and feed into what we think is going to be a really powerful record of truth that will enable us to do the work that we need to do. So the Elders' Truth hearings have just happened, and we've also opened recently supported submissions. So any elder in Victoria is open to tell their truth, as I mentioned before, in any way that they want to tell that. So for some, they've never had the opportunity to tell their story or their truth. Others, it might be they want to share the story so they can make an impact. Some will just want to tell it autonomously off the record, but it's a pretty exciting time to hear these stories, and hopefully that will build on what we're trying to do and that shared understanding piece, as I mentioned. I'm going to just show a little clip. The next one, our first elder that we heard from was someone that you may have all heard of, Uncle Jack Charles, who I had the privilege of sitting in on the day and listening to his story that he tells with such kind of charisma and energy, even though it's such a kind of powerful, hard-hitting, and he's an older man and he's just piecing together his story now, which is very common for a lot of our people due to colonisation.
Leading Indigenous entertainer Uncle Jack Charles has shared his story of being taken from his mother when he was only months old. Uncle Jack was the first elder to give public evidence of his stolen generation experience at Victoria's historic Indigenous Truth-Telling Commission. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are warned that the following story contains images of someone who has died.
When Jack Charles recently met the brother he had never known, he was given a startling insight into the size of his newfound extended family.
And he said, Jack, Dad had 13 of us to different women. I said, that's funny. Mum had 13 of us to different men.
The prominent entertainer and storyteller was the first elders to give evidence before Victoria's Yuruk Truth-Telling Commission about his experiences being taken from his mother when he was just 4 months old. After enduring abuse for years at a boys' home in Melbourne, he wasn't reunited with her until he was 18 and only recently learnt the true identity of his Wurundjeri father through the SBS program Who Do You Think You Are?
Oh, it was a big moment for me as far as completing my journey of discovering of family. Except it's been a long journey. Most of it's been hidden, denied from me, stolen from me.
At the official opening of public hearings, Yuruk commissioners spoke of the task ahead.
It's very important in Australian history. It's a unique opportunity for Aboriginal people, First Peoples, to tell their story about what happened around so-called settlement in Australia.
I'm in such a privileged position to hear so many stories. These stories of resilience, of survival, but also of atrocity, and some stories that have never been told or heard before.
The inquiry has been given the job of establishing an official public record of Indigenous experiences since British colonisation. The Commission will deliver an interim report in June and make final recommendations on reform and redress to the Victorian Government by the middle of 2024. with those findings used to guide treaty negotiations with Indigenous communities. Gareth Borum, SBS World News.
Around, I suppose, how you can participate. As I mentioned, our social media is only going to kind of expand and explode a little bit with some of these stories of heartache and trauma, but also resilience that are going to be really powerful. But also how you can get involved. You can watch our live streams of Elders hearings in the next 12 months. We've been sharing them at the moment. Our website's also a really good kind of tool for resources that's only going to build as well. So I dare say please sign up to our newsletter as well. We'll have education components in there, kind of conversation starters, things that will help even when you have your community consultations here and things in your own workplaces you might be able to reference as well that, hey, did you know this? Or hey, this is what's happening. So please do that. One thing I'll kind of finish with is that I only added this in last night, but it is Reconciliation Week, and whether it's we were speaking before about how important kind of RAPs are and those kind of things and formal working groups, but also just the power of people and conversations. This is just an example. Last week there was an article. I play some football up at Beechworth, up northeast Victoria, and there was a little 3 or 4 of us that kind of had a chat at a camp, our pre-season camp, and the league up there had never done anything with, NAIDOC Week or Reconciliation Week or Indigenous rounds, and we just said, why don't we do something at our club? So what we did, we had a bit of a working group. One of the fellows whose country is up in New South Wales designed a Guernsey about his story and about Beechworth and the community, and we had allies. We had non-Aboriginal members kind of lead, organising singlets, working with the league around changing game times and that for the day. We spoke about the importance of the round. So on the Thursday night coming, we're going to do a Dig performance and speak about some of our stories as a club. On the Saturday, we're bringing in the community as we think is really important to conduct a welcome and a smoking for the community and all the players and netballers and families on the ground that a lot of them wouldn't have seen a cultural performance before. And then, playing in our kind of jumpers. So just something small like that can hopefully be something to get things moving. So Yuruk's super important work. The work that the council and the Shire are doing is really important, but you as people and individuals can still do things in your own world as well. Walking the walk and kind of talking the talk. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that as a bit of a kind of go-to and, be brave and make change and don't just rely on, I suppose, big entities, all the time, even though there's really exciting things happening with Yuruk and the Assembly and the government have been really supportive. Take it upon yourselves as individuals. I want to say thank you and more than happy to kind of answer any questions if you have some now. And if not, I think we're going to have some kind of Q&A stuff later on as well. So thank you for your time and it's been a pleasure.
So we got any questions of Brent? Just while people are thinking, so we've seen the example tonight, Brent, and the bushrangers. You don't like to overdress, do you? That it's you know the climate here. You indicated you come up here.
Yep.
So if you are desperate, we can supply you with some materials. But is there questions in the audience? Yes, we do. Thank you. We've got a microphone coming.
Roaming mic.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Brent. That was really fantastic to hear. My name's Cara. I live in Woodend. My question is a little bit more, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the data sovereignty work you do. What does it mean to have data sovereignty in Yurok and how do you implement that?
Yeah, definitely. So Commissioner Walter is kind of big into data research and methodology, and feel free to follow up about her work if you need to and want to. But she's been really driving that, and it's been probably something that this Royal Commission will do differently. It's been one of the kind of, interim report, it will kind of really tease out data sovereignty and what it means when we're hearing our people's stories. What we mean by it is that if an elder's telling their story, traditionally with a Royal Commission or something similar, that story or that information will go back to the Public Records Office when the Royal Commission ceases. So after the 3 years, that person's story is filed away in government, in the Public Records Office, even though it's someone's story. So what we've done is we've got a series of kind of sheets and processes where from the initial kind of intake or yarn with someone, they have the option to say, I just want my story told, I want to be de-identified, but I want to give that to my 3 kids as part of our story. Or, hey, no, like Uncle Jack, for example, I want the whole world to know about what happened to me, and hopefully that can help, bring our state along further. So there's a series of kind of options and boxes that people can tick or kind of select, I suppose, as to how much they want to share their own data, which I think is really important because not everyone, well, we don't want it just to go back to the government. It's staying in our system and it's not going to the Public Records Office after Yuruk. But B, to give people options and choice, because we know traditionally a lot of Aboriginal people haven't had choice. So just to have from that initial conversation, that's explored and unpacked with people, and they can change that at any time. Obviously, if they might say, hey, I want my story shared, and then 3 months after they've shared their story, some things come up for them, and they say, hey, no, I'm gonna bring that back and just share it for me. So that's a little bit more about it. But as I mentioned before on our website, there is kind of the data sovereignty info sheets. There's like, what is it, why is it important, and what are the kind of options that people have. So I'd probably implore you to have a look at that as well. No worries.
Yeah, great question, Cara. Councillor Mark Ridgway.
Thanks, Brent, and thanks for a really fantastic presentation. I note the education component of your title. Is there any plans on bringing what you're doing into schools as part of the process? Or is this a little bit early yet?
Yeah, no, great question. I probably could have spoken for 6 hours about what I think and what we think can happen in the education space. It's personally kind of my passion, but Yuruk in general, there is a big prevalence. So in the letters pattern, I think it's 5B calls for change in curriculum and education awareness. So essentially my role was formed because in previous truth tellings there hasn't been enough probably education over that 3-year journey of the public and of the community of what's happening. And you would probably testify to that. So what we obviously were talking about the shared understanding piece, and that's important. The back end, and that's kind of where we get, I think, really excited. We've had kind of Labor government already commit to the kind of recommendations, and as I said before, bipartisan support. So there's been talk in letters pattern about curriculum and language redevelopment, but I think there's so much more than that. I think there's Aboriginal workforce, there's schools and how schools are governed with VIT and VRQA and these kind of things. With Department of Education workforce there's a strong Aboriginal workforce, but there's so many things that we need to review and reflect on. You're right, it is too early to, I've got 1,000 ideas in my head written down and talk to commissioners about, but we need to hear from people first around their experience in those systems to help form what our recommendations will be. But you're 100% right. There will be recommendations, and it has been not just because we think it's important, because the Assembly and the communities and government all said it needs to happen as well. I think, my personal opinion, it's all great to have really nice curriculums and, I know the RAPS in school stuff is amazing, but you still need to have, ideally Aboriginal teachers or community members supporting that work. You need mainstream teachers to have confidence. Again, that's something that, from my experience in teaching schools, teachers often lack a bit of confidence. You can have the best curriculum in the world, and all kids need to learn about our shared history as well. So great question, and definitely an education focus throughout, but also specifically in schools, universities, childcare at the end. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Brent, and for your great presentation. My name's Paul. I live in Kyneton. I want to follow on from what Councillor Mark Ridgway has asked about education and broadening it beyond schools and educational institutions. You gave a summary of the objectives of the Yurok Commission, and the first two were to create an historical record of the effects of colonisation. The second one was to develop greater understanding of those. Yep. will you be publishing those in a format that would actually be accessible to schools and to the wider public, say to community groups and others and individuals who are interested in finding out more?
Thanks for the question, and really kind of great question. I feel like you might have been in the URUC offices over the last couple of days when we're having those conversations. So firstly, the interim report will kind of come out, and that'll be more what we're hearing, what we're seeing, what we've done. There'll be a formal kind of report for government and the Assembly. But there'll also be, and we know, I mean, me personally, I can't read. That's enough slides for me for the day. But generally, a community like videos, community-friendly guides, things that are attractive and easy to pick up and run with. And also, as you said, that lasting legacy piece, what can we give a resource to people to run with, or how do they unpack that shared the truth record into schools, or what it looks like. So that'll be a lot of that final recommendation, documentary, books. We've looked at what some of the other truth-telling commissions have done, and they've done some pretty good things, but I suppose we're in a privileged position where we're the latest truth-telling commission, so we can learn from what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what we're hearing as well. So to answer your question, there will be a series of not just kind of documentaries and videos. Look, you're not going to give a school teacher the final recommendation report and the 200 pages of truths, but how do we digest that into the classroom? You're 100% right. I don't have the answer yet, but that is what we are going to be doing. It has to be, as I said, we don't just want to have the report and all these kind of times and truths and traumas sitting there for no reason. We need to actually impact and make something happen of it to inform future generations and schools. So really good question, and something that, yeah, we are going to be doing. So and it has to be in different mediums and different forms. It's everyone's different, you know. Not everyone just wants to read. Not everyone wants just to watch videos. It has to be in different forms. So that's something that we're also pretty cognizant of. Yep.
G'day, Andy's my name, from Malmesbury. I know a lot of stories have already been told, like around the stolen generation some years ago. Will those stories become part of this record, or will people have to tell the stories again, you know, because people will have passed on and that sort of thing? Is there a mechanism for that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And again, like, the questions have been super so far. You're exactly right. I did have it in my presentation, but I was kind of looking back and forth. So the commissioners are looking at previous documents and records from a variety of, obviously, places, which makes complete sense, especially the ones from family members, from museums, from libraries, but those as well who are from First Nations, bringing them home report these previous ones where, A, we don't want people to be re-traumatised if they don't need to be, and their stories out there. So, yes, we are, and that just means we can have a stronger kind of evidence base as well from community that either don't want to share their story or have passed. So, yep.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. My name's Cynthia. I live in Lauriston, which is Dja Dja Wurrung country. I guess just thinking about what you mentioned about the Bringing Them Home report, and another one, I think that only 15% of the recommendations have been implemented. Is that right?
Yeah, I think
or thereabouts.
9 of 50 from a couple of years ago is the last time I checked. So, yeah.
So, and I know that obviously URUC is making recommendations. Is there going to be some ongoing mechanism of oversight and monitoring? Is URUC going to continue in its existence and find different ways to flourish and contribute after the publication of that last report, after the 3-year process of truth-telling?
Thank you for that question. And yeah, so what's been established at the moment is URUC response teams. So they're kind of being appointed at the moment. So we haven't formally met with them at our URUC Justice Commission, haven't met with them. But so, for example, DFFH, Department of Education, DHS, or Department of whatever it was split into, they've all got URUC response teams that are going to be responsible for, when we kind of finish our report, implementing a lot of these changes, which is awesome, I think, because it just gives you more confidence. I think it's always a risk that you're going to do something like this, and as you said, it just sits there, or 10%, 15% of these things are implemented. So to have, genuine commitment from the government to be hiring staff and directors and that in these government organisations now, 2 years out from the end report. I actually thought to myself when we were speaking to our director, I'm like, it's early, is it? Like early to get these people on board, but it means they can set up their frameworks now, they can get their staff sorted, they can meet with us and be on the same page around when we do this final recommendations and final things that the Yuruk Justice Response teams are there ready to go. So it's pretty kind of warming to think that, again, government are committing to kind of seeing it through, but then embedding these changes in policy. I know First People State Relations in DPC as well are doing a lot of work with those teams kind of separate to us. So it just feels genuine, I think, which sometimes, as you would all know, in government and council and these kind of organisations, it's not genuine. I genuinely think it's real and it's happening. So great question, because yeah, as I said, it could be just a 2-year kind of flash in the pan thing, and it's not. It's super, and to have those justice response teams in, the key people who have made these wrongs, I suppose, over the last 230 years to support that change is super. So yeah, thanks for that question, and let's see them get to work as well. That's it. Fingers crossed.
Thank you for the talk, Brett. Graham is my name. I live here in Kyneton. Your talk was very positive. Now you talk about the history and ongoing injustice. I suppose I know a little bit about what's happened here in Kyneton in the past. When we see what's happening in the wider world, there is also going to be some pushback. Is this something you think about, and have you thought how you might handle if that happens?
No, thank you, and thanks for the question and the positive words. Look, there's always going to be pushback, haters, like that's something that's always going to happen. There's going to be some of the Victorian community that don't, understand, don't want to listen, haven't listened, grew up in a time that they weren't educated or didn't want to be educated. So that's their, I suppose, doing. We're always up against challenges. We were speaking about it before, like, this Shire has 3 traditional owners. That's an amazing thing, and to have 3 RAP launches is incredible, but it also brings challenges, and there's challenges within our own Aboriginal communities around lateral violence and these kind of things as well, and you hear bits and pieces occasionally which you expect. You wish everyone was on your side, but it's not all rosy. But as I kind of tried to echo in the presentation, a lot of this has been really positive. We'll face challenges as a commission. We already have, because it's a new thing. It's not something that's been done before. Arnie Eleanor, our chairs, mentioned that the nation's eyes are going to be watching what's happening. This is treaty's new. The Yuruk Royal Commission is new. So again, that's a bit nerve-wracking at times, but it's also really, really exciting. But with that sharpening eye, I suppose, comes a bit of attention, but we embrace it and try to make it positive. So yeah, the things will come up. There'll be hard times for sure, from mainstream, but also from our own Aboriginal community. Not getting out was challenging for communities. They were saying, "What are you doing? Who are you?" And we've kind of made that ground up, obviously, recently, but that's, as you would all know, and if you are genuine, it's an ongoing kind of thing. It's not just we've done one thing and we're on to the next. It's an ongoing conversation and piece of work. So, yeah, there'll be challenges, but, you've got to be optimistic and positive. And in Victoria, there's no reason not to be.
Over to you. Thank you for the question, Graham. Councillor Pearce.
Thanks, Brent. I just wanted to ask about the wonderful people that are telling their truth-telling and their stories, and you mentioned that some of them, have never expressed these before. So there's obviously it's really important and mixed, very emotional for them. Do you have a lot of support, or is the idea, because there was a set period for this, but is the idea that it could continue and the support for them continue to keep telling the stories? You just have some now, but that it could continue?
So there is kind of a plethora of support for people telling their stories. One of the, I suppose, letters pattern, again, I've referenced it a few times, but it was 7 pages, is that we do no more harm. We don't re-traumatise. And it's pretty hard to do, but we've been really careful around, we've got a whole unit around social and emotional wellbeing, and that's intersected into when we first meet with people, when we're gathering their stories and data. So there's a series of staff, counsellors, mental health clinicians who will be there. Some people, and the ones who have told their stories, that's been really kind of, it's been really full on, but a lot of them have told it before and they've got their own people in place. That doesn't mean that we don't offer our Yuruk services to them as well if they need it. And as I mentioned before, it might not be straight away, but it might be a month, 6 months. So we have a kind of checklist and a plan moving forward to support them and their people in their life. And you mentioned about the longevity I suppose at the moment the supported submissions for our elders are open at the moment, and then kind of after the interim report we'll open that up to the Aboriginal community in Victoria. June 2024 is kind of the final report piece. Look, that's what I'm thinking will stay, but there is talk that it might get extended a little bit from government. But who knows? This might lead to something else and continue that conversation. But to answer your question, hope is that there is significant supports around people telling their story, because the main aim was to not re-traumatise people, and hopefully, we get a lot of people tell their stories. We've had guesses at how many we might get, but how long that goes for, we're not sure. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this moment that Yuruk is starting up. It's quite historic and powerful in this region and across the state. I'm Rachel Detman from Bainton and have been there 26 years, originally from Atlanta. My question is around the two-way process of truth-telling. At what point, or will there be a time where some of the earlier settler families and colonial first groups who still have descendants in the region can also bring some of the knowledge around negative and positive overlap and interaction with First Nations peoples?
Thanks for the question. And again, super important as well to hear and to have those stories shared, to make that kind of full picture, I suppose, of that kind of truth record. That's kind of where our commissioners are working out those kind of timelines at the moment. We do kind of take submissions and questions and artefacts and stories ad hocly at the moment, but there will be a kind of time where it's called and kind of, I suppose, made significantly stronger and louder that we want to, this is the themes that we're looking at. So our commissioners at the moment, it'll be kind of mentioned in the interim report, the themes that they're going to be looking into, and in that will be a part around kind of non-Aboriginal families, as you said, positive and negative, what that impact meant, what are the stories, because that'll help kind of shape the story that we need to put together. So there will be a time for that voice and those stories. When it is, I can't exactly tell you, but in the interim report, there'll be the kind of the themes that our commissioners are looking at, and one of them will be that. So thanks for the detailed question. Thank you, everyone.
Well done, Brent.
I think we've all learnt a lot more about the work of the Yuruk Justice Commission. Brent, thanks for stepping us through that, because I've certainly learnt a lot, and we're hearing lots in the news about the different bodies and the First Peoples Assembly, Treaty, Yuruk Commission, and trying to join the dots on who's doing what and how it comes together, and I think you've stepped us through that really nicely. Thank you. And some really terrific questions from the audience. You're always a little bit worried, will the questions come? And they came, and they were really thoughtful and thought-provoking questions. So thank you, well done. And there's more time to question Brent later on the panel. Just take a breather, take a glass of water, Brent. You've done a terrific job. Our second and final speaker tonight is Nicole Finlay, who is CEO of Reconciliation Victoria. Nicole has a long history of building relationships and partnership projects with First Peoples in Victoria. She's worked in the Aboriginal employment sector since 2002. She co-founded an Aboriginal employment social enterprise in 2017. She writes and supports reconciliation action plans across the state and has extensive connections working with Victorian local governments, education and community service stakeholders. Much of Nicole's work history has involved working in consultation and partnership with traditional owners and many First Nations peoples and communities to develop strategic partnership projects and services to close disparity gaps for and with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. As a leader with a strong lens in two worlds, Nicole understands that reconciliation is about taking time to acknowledge the past, to build mutually respectful relationships, and to be honest and open in how we work together. How we share knowledge, care for each other, the community and country. Great to have you here. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you very much for coming out this evening, everybody, and being part of this really important event this evening. And I'll just want to quickly say thank you to Brent for that, wonderful presentation and those insights that we've all been waiting for, and so much needed for all of us. So thank you very much for sharing. I'm going to respectfully begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all of the lands that we are meeting on this evening. So the Tangarang peoples, Dja Dja Wurrung and the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung, as the traditional custodians and guardians of the lands, the waters, culture and community that we meet on today. So, and I'd like to respectfully acknowledge all community members that are here with us today, First Peoples, and also extend that respect to reconciliation champions, allies, friends, advocates that have walked in this journey for many years. I'd like to also acknowledge elders that are with us this evening, past, present and emerging. And I'm just going to take you on a little bit of a journey, because I think some of the questions that were shared with us tonight are really important and touching on some of that history that we've had together, the shared positive and negative history. And Reconciliation Victoria doesn't shy away from the truth and the truth-telling. We never have. We've been in the space for 20 years, working in partnership with First Peoples to facilitate reconciliation across the state, and we're seeking a deeper understanding of culture, respect and justice. And I'm just sharing some beautiful photos with our First Peoples Cultural Council here, and I want us to sort of move away from this word, our First Peoples. In fact, we are their second peoples for many of us here. And the word our First Peoples needs to come out of it. So First Peoples Cultural Council, led by Uncle Jim Berg, Gunditjmara Elder, Senior Elder in the centre there, and my predecessor in the beanie there, Diana David, who led Reconciliation Victoria for many years, and I am now walking in some very safe footsteps, which has endorsed this path for me. And I guess I've worked in partnership with all the previous CEOs of Reconciliation Victoria for the last 20 years. It's a real privilege to be in this role. I guess my journey with First Peoples, I grew up on Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country. We celebrated the Wurundjeri Festival back in the 80s in the municipality of Doncaster. So local government, back off the back of the referendum, was actually doing some really interesting things, and I think if we deep dive into local government archives, we'd actually find a lot of interesting truth-telling from our non-Indigenous community members as well, wanting this positive change back then in the 70s and 80s. It's well worth deep diving into those archives. And just sharing over here, Uncle Cole Walker taking us up on country on Barma country and taking us through, showing us how much water is needed in Dangala in the Murray River. And so good that we're finally getting some rain to fill up the rivers, those natural and traditional water paths that connected all the First Nations across this state. We need to respect them and keep them healthy, and that was if you haven't had a chance to get up on Barma country, take a trip whilst we're allowed out now. And so our vision, we've had an unrelenting vision for 20 years, I guess, as a formal association to see a Victorian identity that reflects our true history, that values Aboriginal culture and ensures self-determination and equitable outcomes for Australia's First Peoples. And so what does this look like, this truth-telling journey together? I think if we look at the reconciliation movement, I want to touch on that question about, you know, this historical journey about, in some claim that 1960s was when the reconciliation movement started. Reconciliation Australia says 1991. But there was a great question asked respectfully by Bernie, the CEO, tonight about what else might be out there in terms of some of that, potentially that positive engagement that happened around settlement. And Brent and I were talking about this too, about that revitalisation of culture and language might just give us that truth-telling. And we also know that even in touching back on Manningham City Council's archives, they have a historical document that Uncle Bill Nicholson Wurundjeri has put together. And in there he talks about the Narangita from the Wurundjeri had a Woiwurrung word for well-meaning white settlers during settlement, and it was called Namaji. And so when we ask the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, what does this mean? Does this mean that we had that positive story, that there were people that wanted a positive story and wanted to forge stories of survival, love, friendship, together with our First Peoples? And I think this is part of our opportunity to explore that journey, to revitalise culture and language so that we can actually get into understanding some of that other chapters, but respectfully also taking in some of that pain, because that's also part of our journey together. So I'm going to throw over to Adrian up there to just take us on a bit of a bit of an uplift now on being brave, making change from Reconciliation Australia's perspective. So we'll...
This National Reconciliation Week, be strong, be determined, be proud, be bold, be the difference. So together, we can make a more just, equitable and reconciled Australia. This National Reconciliation Week. Be brave, make change.
And I love that boldness of the colour and the energy, and really through Reconciliation Australia we all have statewide bodies, Reconciliation Victoria. We're not funded by Reconciliation Australia, we're totally independent. We do receive funding for the Narragansett Raps in Schools program. And then beneath and around, we work very, very closely with 29 local reconciliation groups across the state as well. So they're the micro groups. And really, it's hats off to Macedon Rangers for wanting to develop a local reconciliation group, because what we find, again, is those stories and the community members that make up those local reconciliation groups. They've been around well before Reconciliation Victoria. Some of the stories that live in those local reconciliation groups are elders that have been on this path for many years. You know, I meet non-Indigenous elders who are in local rec groups who have worked in remote communities when they've been dry. They've been pilots and seen dry communities turn into, you know, the worst type of communities through the drugs and alcohol that have been brought in. These elders that have been pastors' wives that are speaking fluent in language, and those community members from those remote communities in Alice are still travelling down to Victoria now to stay with those families. Again, reconciliation in action in all of these families, and they're in our local rec groups. So I'd invite you, if you have that story, to be part of that story here and that action that Brent says that local people really can make, and they make that difference. So some of the things where we're seeing that state policy change, we've seen with the federal election the promise in the first opening statement from the newly elected Prime Minister that he will fully support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We've all been waiting for that language. We've been waiting, and we will keep waiting, and we will walk alongside First Peoples in hope, with patience, and we will sit alongside. I love when you shared the pictures of Uncle Wayne, the Commissioners Burke, Commissioners Sue Ann Hunter, and I feel like I've been in this space a long time, that I've worked with their family members, and their Uncle Wayne lived 2 doors up from me, and Sue Ann Hunter, the late Uncle Norm, worked with him for many years in the education sector, and it feels so wonderful to see people like Sue Ann coming into leadership roles, for us to understand and value Aboriginal leadership and Aboriginal governance, what that will look like in our parliaments and our local governments, and how we can see that change, how we can actually embed that cultural change in our organisations, and how we see that through emerging young leaders like Brent. And we see so many of the young emerging leaders now coming through, like the democracy ambassadors of Aboriginal ambassadors. And one of our tasks with RecVic will be to share more about these young emerging leaders coming up into the state election. So I want to talk a little bit more about that treaty advancement in Victoria, so the First Peoples Assembly. It's so wonderful to be out at events and having people representatives from the First Peoples Assembly presenting alongside, and hearing that strong voice about treaties and what those local treaties for each First Nation on Victoria, with in partnership with state government, what that's going to look like. And really the lens is on Victoria, as Brent said, with the newly elected government. We see they're going to be looking at that constitutional voice in Parliament and that constitutional recognition. And what they're also looking at, the new Federal Indigenous Affairs Minister, Linda Burney, came down to Melbourne, and she said, we are squarely looking at Victoria, because Victoria's already been making these inroads for the last few years. And so if we're going to be doing this on a national scale, we need to know how it's been done, how the First Peoples Assembly was elected, and again, that First Peoples governance, seeing what that looks like and what will that look like on a national scale, and that revitalisation of language, place, people, purpose, all coming through in those treaties. So we're supporting treaties. We've got Victorian Aboriginal and Local Government Strategy. You've successfully launched this RAP, this beautiful document that we've also seen at the beginning of, in March, the Victorian Aboriginal and Local Government Strategy, a 5-year strategy which will mean the introduction of self-determination local action plans in our local governments for the next 5 years. Gough Whitlam back in the 70s called for self-determination policies. We are now 2022 and we are now seeing this call for self-determination local action plans, and to be led in partnership. At the heart of it, it's about shared decision making. And so what will that look like in local governments? And there will be so much that local governments there's been 15 local governments across the state who've been brave enough to embark on the RAP journey. And now all of a sudden we've had the Victorian Aboriginal Local Government Strategy being launched, led by an Aboriginal committee and caucus, which is is groundbreaking work. It is one of the most progressive plans, so I'd really invite you to have a look at that strategy. But how will RAPS then come together with the Victorian Aboriginal Local Government Strategy? How will they blend together? What we're seeing in at Reconciliation Victoria, the response to the launch of the VALGs is every other local government saying we've got to get a RAP now because we're looking at something that's so progressive. So RAPs are tried and tested, and they really highlight, you know, when we have those traditional boundaries, when we've plonked local governments on top of traditional boundaries, they help us to understand, well, where are those traditional boundaries and community networks? And so they've got a lot of value in them, RAPs, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit more. Something that we've touched on and about education, truth-telling in education. We've seen the Department of Education finally this year say we are going to invest in truth-telling in schools. So we're receiving a small amount at Reconciliation Victoria. The first thing that we will do, and the first thing we have done, is reach out to our first community, and I've just done it myself, but First Peoples community partners, like the great Dr. Lois Peeler from Warrawa College, the Aboriginal College out at Healesville, and we've been presenting on the resource that they put together with Parliament of Victoria called the Aboriginal Changemakers. Would really invite you to have a look at that. Again, a free online resource and a really amazing example of First Peoples giving knowledge very, very freely and openly to create that positive change. So that was one of the first webinars that we presented about 2 weeks ago. We're going to continue doing monthly webinars around truth-telling in Australian history, and it'll be directed at educators across the state. I'm supposed to meet with Councillor Burke and Commissioner Hunter, and our next conversation will be to make sure that we're in the webinar space together as well. So that is our task with RecVic, and I'll share a little bit more about some other brave things that we need to do as a state organisation. One thing in walking into this role 3 months ago, I said, well, what is the state of reconciliation? You know, I've been sitting in events and presented at events, and people have said, oh, put their hand up, we had a RAP and it didn't work, you know? And I want to be able to have those conversations with people, those honest conversations. So the RecVic measuring stick will be a statewide survey. We have 5 dimensions of reconciliation which have been determined by First Peoples and our First Peoples partners. And we want to be able to run that survey with Aboriginal researchers for the first time. So we're working with Swinburne University and La Trobe University, Aboriginal researchers. So one thing that I would invite you is, as residents to this area, you will receive that survey. So please respond when it comes out to you. We'll also be launching for the first time a membership platform. One thing is that we want a sustainable workforce. I want to be able to employ and offer sustainable roles to First Peoples. I cannot do that on funding that is unsustainable, and I won't do it. I've worked in Aboriginal employment for 20 years, so I know that I have a task ahead of me, and one of those is to reach out to the community to say, do we want a sustainable movement of reconciliation and self-determination in this state? We're going to do that through the membership platform. A lot of people say, oh, I want a RecVic jumper, I want a RecVic hat. However way that you want to support, please do come on board. It'll be through our membership platform. We have Wurundjeri words that have been gifted to us to name that platform. So through all of our campaign work, we will be integrating First Nations languages from Victoria into everything that we do going forward. With our Magalee website here in this place that came about in 2009. It was a small seed that grew out of the Darebin City Council. Again, another example of best practice with local governments, saying we need to be able to show and share best practice of local governments and First Peoples working in partnership and harmoniously developing projects together. We need to be able to share what Macedon's doing with Bass Coast and Bass Coast with, down at Alpine. So we were able to, with 79 local governments across the state, be able to share who were the Aboriginal contact liaison officers, who has RAPs, and we were able to share all of that on Magalee. So we'll be working closely with the Victorian Aboriginal and Local Government Strategy. It's under the DJPR, that's the acronym, Department of Jobs, Precinct, Regions, to further develop content on Magalee, and we'll be doing monthly webinars. The great thing that, and if we can say great things about COVID, it has opened up that avenue for us to share information really broadly and invite you into these webinar spaces with us. It's free knowledge, and all of our webinars will be led and in partnership with First Peoples. So again, I've touched on those education webinars and also profiling culturally safe spaces in our community where non-Indigenous and First Peoples can engage safely together under protocols that First Peoples are sharing with us. So there's 17 Aboriginal gathering places across the state. So if we think that there's 79 local governments across the state and only 17 gathering places, we can see a gap, and we can also see an opportunity there as well. So we'll be raising the profile of Aboriginal gathering places in partnership with a First Peoples consultant who has developed the Sustainable Gathering Place model, Karen Millwood. Many of you may have heard of Karen over the years. We'll be doing that in partnership. We do an on-country forum every year, so as a member, if you come on board, you are very, very welcome. We are looking at the moment on where we'll be holding that on-country forum this year. We've talked about supporting treaty and the state election coming in the end of the year around October, November. We ran a survey during the federal election of the 366 House candidates, House representative candidates, and the senators across Victoria. We had 51 candidates respond. We had 51 responses out of the 366. We specifically highly branded the survey, and we asked each of the candidates their position on the reconciliation issues, particularly around constitutional recognition, constitutional voice to Parliament, the Uluru Statement of the Heart, supporting treaties and truth-telling. All of these critical questions we asked, and one party in particular I had to prompt. We used a legitimate research agency to run all of this work, and one party, not one candidate replied. And it's a good thing they're not in power anymore. So, again, we will be working with the democracy ambassadors, with young Aboriginal emerging leaders. What is First Peoples' perspective on and young emerging leaders on what is self-determination? If we are developing self-determination, local action plans across local governments, what are the young emerging leaders going to tell us about what self-determination looks like through a First Peoples lens? Because time and time again, we see organisations say to me, "Oh, I'd love you to develop a RAP for me. I need it done in 3 months, and we'd really like self-determination in there." Okay, what does self-determination mean to you? And that's where the conversation goes really, really flat. There isn't an understanding of the 11 self-determination principles. There's not an understanding of any of the First Peoples perspective. So there's a really great documentary out by the late, great David Gulpilil on SBS called, and I think it's Another Country, don't quote me on that, but it touches in on Raminginning, and it really provides that two worlds perspective on self-determination. If you have a moment, or you may already have seen it, it really touches on how sometimes in our goodwill we overstep the mark and not understanding that our perception of self-determination from a non-Indigenous lens may not be the same as First Peoples, and just taking that time to listen in there. And also we've talked about the 29 local reconciliation groups. So that's some of our actions. If you do work for an organisation and you would like to have a long-term collaborative agreement with us, Uncle Jim Berg from our First Peoples Cultural Council has gifted us the Gunditjmara word muji, which means friendship, and this allows Reconciliation Victoria to stay in conversation with you on the development of your reconciliation action plans. We are absolutely 150% committed to seeing meaningful RAPs. The times when I have to stand up and an Aboriginal aunt or uncle will stand up and say, I have had the responsibility of carrying the entire reconciliation action plan, reconciliation off my own back in this organisation, as well as develop all the external relationships for community, as well as be the internal cultural awareness advisor and everything else. They end up walking out of that role and no one gets anywhere with that RAP. So we ask the ongoing engagement and consultation with traditional owners, all First Nations peoples in that live, work and visit that municipality or that shire. The ongoing engagement with staff and participation and working with RAP experts. So building up, investing long term in cultural experts and engaging with people like Brent and the URIC Commission, where we can tap into that knowledge that we need to get into our RAP deliverables. So dedicated RAP resources, tracking and wrapping, and putting, yes, our business acumen in that business world is actually really important in tracking and measuring RAP success. So we can measure it like in that data sovereignty perspective. We need to be able to track our progress through the 5 dimensions of reconciliation, making it an organisational wide plan. So organisations don't go, oh, we've got this brilliant council plan over here and the RAP, we're just going to tuck it here underneath the diversity and inclusion plan here in people and culture, where when we do cultural safety a scan, I've been responsible for doing cultural safety audits in organisations, and often some of the most culturally unsafe places are in the people and culture area where that plan gets parked. So they're just little areas where we need to be really honest about doing that assessment of our workforce and taking responsibility of our cultural learning journeys. Brent, you've shared great information with us today, but that for us to be able to get into that cultural learning journey in that RAP journey that we're going on, Bernie, you talked about, what does that look like for us as an organisation? And we in reconciliation, we know that it's relationships, but it's also knowing that in our organisation, we are all at such different points in our cultural learning journey. So the greatest thing we see with organisations is they go, oh, great, I've made friends with this consultant over here. We'll get them to do some cultural awareness. But what we're realising is, I had a hospital ring me the other day and say, oh, we did this cultural awareness and it landed really badly and half of our staff have ended up in EAP. So without assessing our workforce or even running any survey and actually saying, well, where are we all at? Where is some really great targeted training over here? Or where is the organisation really potentially unsafe? Or if we're recruiting into that area because that's where entry-level jobs are, but it's really unsafe, we need to be doing that assessment and, that self-reflection work, looking back at ourselves. And so all of this is all probably very obvious to many of you who've worked in the RAP space before or been in that reconciliation journey in your workforces, respective workforces or communities. So, Aboriginal employment, engaging with services, and again, increasing our understanding of shared decision making. I'm going to complete tonight's presentation. Thank you so much for allowing me to chat with you this evening, and the privilege of engaging with the councillors coming out this evening as well. Thank you so much for your time. In concluding, I'm doing a blatant plug because Uncle Jim Berg is Senior Elder for the First Peoples Cultural Council in Reconciliation Victoria, and we need to be truly and sincerely guided by First Peoples and the First Peoples Cultural Council in Reconciliation Victoria. So on Thursday evening at Black Dot Gallery in Brunswick, if you would love to come along, please do. There will be hundreds of community members there, and Uncle Jim will be sharing his stories will be there for everybody to read, listen. There'll be a booklet given away. But these scar trees are from Watchabaluk country, so going up Horsham Way and further, where one of the biggest collections of scar trees are. We have the great privilege of being gifted that scar tree photo collection from Uncle Jim, as well as a Curie portrait series which has come out of the Bunjalaka Museum of Victoria. And so we will be presenting this exhibition in respect for Uncle Jim and the great work that he's done in the justice sector over the years, spent many, many times, and he's fought really hard to bring ancestral remains back and on country, and we are so privileged to be led by this senior elder, 84 years young, and I'd like to share a reading from Uncle Jim with you to complete today's presentation. Thank you for your time.
Silent witness, a window to the past. This display of scar trees is dedicated to the traditional owners of Watchabaluk country, and in particular to the memory of Patrick Kennedy. Rest in peace, old friend. Come with me on a journey to Watchabaluk country. I would like to share with you some glimpses of the trees of this country. As far as I know, there is no other area in the whole of Australia that you would be able to find so many scar trees so close together. You will hear the people of the land speak through the trees. They tell of what they had seen through the eyes of the trees. They were the supermarkets of the land. They provided food, shelter, transport, medicine, tools and weapons. The scar trees are a testimonial to the skills of the people who harvest the canoes, coolamans and shields without taking the life of the tree. The scar trees are a witness to a way of life and freedom of the people to roam at will throughout their own country. I feel deeply emotional, stirred and saddened that what we see, a whole of this way of life and identity with the traditionals of language, customs, beliefs and culture were not able to be passed down through the generations. The government policies and mission life all played a part. And yet, some of the government policies and missions may have saved us from total extinction. These scar trees are a reminder of the past, and they are linked to all trees. Take the memory of these scar trees with you forever. Share the stories with your family. Take to this gift. Close your eyes and hug a tree. The heartbeat you hear is your heartbeat and the heartbeat of the tree. For a brief, short moment, you and the tree are one. In time, you, the tree, and I will become as one as a return to our spiritual mother, the land. Close your eyes and hug a tree.
Thanks, Nicole. That was fantastic. And once again, learn a lot about Reconciliation Victoria and the journey that you're going on to support everyone working in the space and also the support that you can give to local